Welcome to part 3 and the final part of this tutorial series where we're creating this Sci-Fi Passage in Blender. So in parts 1 and 2 we did all of the modeling, so the Sci-Fi Passage is now finished. And we also added a camera and just put the camera in the scene. So in this part we're going to be doing the lighting and the materials, and then we will render the final image and do some compositing. Now, as I talked about in part 1 of the tutorial series, I am going to be using the Cycles rendering engine because I do want this render to be very realistic. I am going for realism. If you want to use Eevee though, you totally can, but I will be using Cycles. Now, if you are going to be using Eevee, then the emission lights won't actually light up the scene. So if you are going to be using Blender Eevee, then you'll need to add some normal lights. If I press Shift A, you can go right down here to light and you can just add some normal lights. So to light up the Sci-Fi Passage, I would probably use point lights and area lights. And so I would maybe put some area lights kind of on the top pointing down just to light up the Sci-Fi Passage, and then also on the side I might also add some point lights. But I'm going to be using the Cycles render engine because I am going for realism. Now while we are right over here on the render properties, I also want to go right down here and open up the color management, and I want to use the filmic color management here on the view transform, and then on the look here I want to change this to high contrast. So this is going to make the entire scene more contrasty, and it's going to pop out the colors, make the colors more saturated, and it'll make the whole entire scene look a bit nicer. And also in the compositor, after we render the scene, we will be doing a little bit of color correction as well. So to preview the rendered view, I'm going to hold down the Z button and move my mouse up to the rendered view. And then I only want it to render what is in the camera view, so I'm going to press Control B in the camera, and I'm going to drag a box around this and let go. So this way it's only going to render what the camera can see, so the preview times will be faster. And if you're using Blender Eevee, then this won't work. It only works in Cycles. And you can't really see anything, but that's because we haven't really added any lights. Now, if you click right over here on the world properties, you can see there is a world, and I could take the color and turn this up and it's a bit brighter, and you can kind of see a little bit of light now coming in. But I actually don't want any world lights because we are going to be adding emission materials which will actually light up the scene. So I actually want to click on the X right here, and that is going to delete the world. So now it is completely black. So because this is fully black now, I am going to be using the material preview mode to actually see the material. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and go right down here to the material preview so we can actually get an idea of what the material looks like. So I'm now going to select the main object, and I'm going to go right over here to the material properties. So I can now click on new to add a new material, and I'm going to rename this to light metal. So light metal. And then to create this material, I can click right over here to go to the shading workspace. So in the shading workspace, you should have a 3D view and then also a shader editor. I'm going to make this smaller so I can just see the shader editor bigger. And then over here in the 3D space, I'm going to hold down the Z button, move up into the rendered view. Actually, I want to preview this in the material preview because we don't have any lights yet. So I'll hold down the Z button and go into the material preview. Now, before we continue with the procedural nodes, I am going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on. So if you don't have the add-on enabled, you can just click on edit, and then you can open up the preferences. And then what you can do is just click over on the add-ons tab, and then right up here on the search, you can search for node and just check mark the Node Wrangler add-on. So it's built into Blender. You don't need to download anything. It's built into Blender, and you can just check mark that, and I will show you how to use it in the video. So you can just close the user preferences. So now that the Node Wrangler is turned on, we can use what's called the principled texture setup. And the principled texture setup is a Node Wrangler feature. And so what it does is it looks at the names in all of your image textures, and it correctly plugs all the textures up and actually creates the material for us. And as I talked about in part 1 of the tutorial series, I am going to be using a free metal texture from Ambient CG. So I will have the link in the description if you'd like to download the same texture that I'm using. And on Ambient CG, I am going to be downloading the 4K version and the JPEG version of the textures. So I'm going to click on the principled shader, and then I'm going to press Control Shift T. So if you want to use the same texture that I'm using, once you've downloaded the textures, you're going to get a zip file and you can just extract the zip file and then you can just go into the folder. This is the Metal 011. Again, this is from Ambient CG and this is the 4K version and the JPEG version. So now I just want to select all the textures that I want to use. So I want to just use some of these. So I'm going to select the color. Then I'm going to hold down the control key and I want to select the normal GL and also the metalness and then also the roughness. Just those 4 textures, make sure they're all selected, and then I can click on Principled Texture Setup. And so the Node Wrangler add-on is going to look at the names in the textures, and so it knew that this was the base color and the metallic and the roughness and normal, and so it plugged everything up correctly. And so now if you zoom in here, kind of look on the side of the tunnel, you can see that that metal texture has been applied, and that is looking very cool. Now instead of using the UV editing, I want to use an easy texturing method that I like to use. So I'm not going to be using UV editing, I'm just going to be using this easy texturing method. So what I'm going to do here on the mapping right over here is I'm going to, instead of using the UV, I'm going to instead use the object. So I'm going to plug the object into the vector. And so this is going to place the texture on the object differently from the UV. So now you can see it has done something different, but there's like a lot of tiling. And also there are some seams that you might be able to see, and there's also some stretching. So there are a few more things that I want to do so that the textures are placed nicely on the object. So right over here on the textures, on all of these textures, I want to click on this flat here, and I instead want to change this to a box. And I can bring that up a little bit so there's more space. So then right here, click on flat and change that to box. You can also just hold down the control key and scroll your mouse wheel with your mouse hovered over the flat and just change that to box. Or just click right here and just change that to the box. So now that I've changed that to box, if you kind of zoom in here, you can see it's placing the texture very nicely and evenly, and there isn't really any stretching. Now there is a lot of tiling, but we are going to change that. You can see the texture looks like it's tiling. You can see that it's like the same texture going over and over again, but we will change that in a moment. And then the other thing that I want to do is I want to turn the blend value up on all of the textures. So I'm going to turn the blend value to like a 0.2, and I'm going to do that for all the textures. So the blend to 0.2, and the blend to 0.2, and also the blend value to 0.2. And what the blend value is going to do is going to blend the textures together and kind of blur the edges where there might be any seams. Now you can see that the texture is scaled way too small and you're still able to see the tiling. So one really easy way we can fix the tiling is by changing the rotation. So what I can do is I can change the Z rotation and I can kind of rotate it sideways, and that way it's going to be harder to see the tiling. So on this Z value, I'm just going to type in 45, so it's rotated over by 45 degrees. And then if you look in the camera view, that is going to make it a bit harder to see the tiling because the texture is going sideways. Now the texture is still way too big, so I want to make the texture much smaller. So I can actually change the scale value on this mapping node, and that'll change the size of the texture. So I'm going to click and then drag down and then let go on the scale, and that's going to change all the values at the same time. And I'm going to be using a scale value of 0.2. So now you can see the texture is much bigger and that looks a lot better, and you can still see a little bit of the tiling, but in the camera view it's quite hard to see, and especially with all of the different lights and everything, it's going to be very, very hard to notice. So now we just have a really, really nice metal texture all over the Sci-Fi Passage. Now I do want to make this metal just a little bit darker, so right over here between the base color and the principled, I want to add a node in here to make it a bit darker. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I can search for the RGB curves, and I'm just going to click on the RGB curves and drop it in the wire between the base color and the principled. So I can now just click, and that's going to add a little dot, and I'm just going to drag this down, and you can see it's going to make it a little bit darker. So I'm just going to make that a bit darker, not too much darker, but just a little bit. So something like that is pretty good. Now I also want to add the light metal to these other objects here, so I'm just going to zoom in, and then what I can do is I can actually just click right here, and I can drag and drop this material onto these objects. Or you can just select the objects, and then you can click on the drop down and then just select the light metal. So now all three of those objects have the light metal. Alright, now if this entire Sci-Fi Passage just had the same material, that would look pretty boring, and so I want to make another variation of this material but have it be some darker metal. So then some parts parts will be lighter and some parts will be darker, and it'll add more variation and interest. So what I'm going to do is select this object here, and then I'm going to press the tab key to go into edit mode, and I can just press the A key to select everything, and I can press the period on the numpad just to zoom over to this. So we can just add the different materials to this part, and then it's going to be mirrored and arrayed over. So I'm just going to select the parts that I want to have the dark metal. So I'm going to press the A key to deselect everything, and then I am going to press the L key with my mouse hovered over this object, and then also navigate over here and press the L key and the L key to select those objects. And then also these little metal pieces right here, I want to press the L key with my mouse hovered over those objects just to select them. So select those ones, and also this one here, and also that one right there. And those are all the different pieces. So I now want to make all of these pieces have the dark metal. So what I'm going to do is just open up this side panel right here, and I'm going to go right down here to the material properties. So now within this object's materials, I want to add another material in the slot. So to do this, I'm going to click on the plus icon right here to make another material within this object. Then I can click on the drop down, and I want to first select the light metal. So now we have two light metals, but I now want to duplicate this light metal and make it a different material. So I'm going to click on this button right here, and this is going to duplicate the material, but it's going to keep all the same information with the textures. Now it says light metal 001. I just want to double click on this to rename it, and I'm going to instead rename it to dark metal. All right, so now we have light metal and dark metal. So then with these objects still selected and with the dark metal selected, I can click on the assign button. So now these pieces have the dark metal. Now you can see nothing has really changed, and that's because the light metal and the dark metal look exactly the same. So I can just zoom into the RGB curves, and I can just pull this down, and now the dark metal is actually going to be much darker. And I'm going to bring this way down, just drag this dot way down so it is very dark. And if I press the tab key to go back to object mode, I can press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and now you can see that that Sci-Fi Passage has much more interest because some parts are lighter and some parts are darker. So that is looking very cool. So I now want to create another material for the pipe objects. So just select this object, tab into edit mode, and I'm just going to navigate over here, and I can press the A key to deselect everything. And I can just make this a bit smaller for now. So I just want to zoom in here, and I want to click right over here to go to the face select. So I can now hover my mouse over all of the pipes and press the L key with your mouse hovered over the pipes. That's going to select the linked vertices, and we just want to select all those pipes there. And also right over here, L and L and L just to select all those pipes. And these pipes, these are going to be emission lights, so they're actually like circular lights. So I don't want them to have the pipe material, I want them to have a different material. So now let's create the pipe material. So within this object's material slots, I want to click on the plus here to add a new material. Let's click on new, and I can just rename this material to pipes. All right, and then with that still selected and with the pipe selected, you can click on the assign button, and then I can just tab to go back to object mode, and I can press 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. So you can now see that all those pipes have the pipe material. So now right over here, if I just make this smaller, we just need to actually create the pipe material. So I'm going to zoom into the pipe so I can see it. And then to start off, I want to make the pipes metal. So let's turn the metallic value all the way up to 1. And then I also want the pipes to be a little bit more shiny. So I'm going to turn the roughness value down to like a 0.4. So the pipes are a little bit more shiny. And then I also want the pipes to just be a little bit darker. So here on the base color, I can just turn this down a little bit. So just click on this and turn this down so they're a little bit darker. So that is it for the pipes material, just a very simple basic material. So I now want to add the blue glowing lights. So I'm going to press the tab key to go back into edit mode. I'm going to zoom right over here. So just press the A key to make sure everything is deselected. And I now just want to select the faces which are going to be emitting light. So press the L key with your mouse hovered over these pipes, and then also navigate right over here and press the L key to select that one as well. And then also zoom in here, and I'm going to press the L key with my mouse hovered over all of these buttons. We're just going to select all of those as well. So I now want to give all of these the emission material. So I'm going to click on the plus right here to add a new material in the slot. I can click on new, and I want to rename this material to blue light. All right, blue light. And then if you click right here on this surface, we can change it from the principled instead to the emission. So go right up here and click on emission, and then it's going to be actually emitting light. And then you can click on the assign button to assign those faces to that material. So I can tab to go back to object mode, and let's press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. So now I can hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view, and I can actually preview this in the rendered view. So I want to turn the strength up, so I'm going to turn the strength up pretty high to like a 40, and that way they're going to be much brighter and they're really going to light up the scene. And then I also want to take this color and I want to make this a slight blue color. A bit more blue though, so something like that. I don't want to make it super saturated because then the actual light looks blue. I just want to make it somewhat saturated so the actual light looks bright and white, but then it's going to be actually shining a blue color. Now there is one thing that I actually forgot to model, so let's do that real quick. So I'm going to click right back here to go to the layout, and then I'm going to hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view. So I'm going to press the tab key to go into edit mode, and I want to zoom in here. So I'm going to zoom into the center part, and in this center part I want to add some lights here, some lights on the top. So I'm going to select this face, and then I'm going to hold down the shift key and select these other faces. And I can press the period on the numpad just to zoom into the selection. So I just want to make some little lights up here. So I'm first going to press the I key. The I key will inset the faces, and then I can press the B key, and that is going to toggle the boundary. And I just want to make these pretty small, so something like that. And then I can press G to grab, and I want to bring them in on the X-axis and just bring them in a little bit. Then I can press E to extrude, and I want to extrude this back up just like that. All right, and maybe bring them up a little bit more. So I can hold down the Z button, go into the material preview and see what that's looking like. So I now want to give these the blue light. So we're already in edit mode and we already have those faces selected. So I can just click on the blue light right here, and then I can click on assign. So now those are going to be emitting lights as well. So I can press the 0 on the numpad, and I can tab to go to object mode, and I can hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view. Let's see how that's looking. So that is starting to look very cool. All right, so some of these lights I want to be the blue light, but then some of these lights I also want to be a much more white light. So I'm going to hold down the Z button, go back into the solid view, and then I'm just going to select this right here, select the object, and press tab to go into edit mode. And I'm just going to zoom over here. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and go down into the material preview to preview the materials. So one light that I want to add is this right here. So I'm actually going to hover my mouse over this object and press L. That's going to select that object. And then I want to zoom in here, and I want some of these lights here to have a white material instead of a blue material. So press the L key with your mouse hovered over the lights, and I'm just going to select like 3 of them. So now all these pieces here that are selected, I want those to be a similar material, but they're going to be white instead of blue. So I'm going to click right back over here on the material properties, and I'm going to click on the plus here to add a new material in the slot. Now I actually want to click on the drop down, and I want to first add the blue light, but then I want to duplicate this so that it is a separate material. So I'm going to click on this button right here, and that is going to duplicate the material. And now it says blue light 001. I'm going to rename this material to white light. All right, there we go, white light. And then with these objects still selected, I can click on the assign button. Now right now the materials are basically the same. That's because we haven't actually changed the settings of the white light. So I'm going to click right back over here on the shading tab, and I can also press tab to go to object mode. So within the white light, I want to change this material. So I'm just going to click on this color right here, and I'm going to make this much more white. Now I do want to make this very, very slightly blue, so I will just kind of bring it over to the blue, but it's mostly going to be in the center. And this is just going to add a little bit more variation, so you can see some of the lights are much more white, like right there, but then some of the other lights, like the ones over here, are blue. All right, so we've added all the materials for this main piece here, but I also want to add the materials for the pieces back in here. So in the camera view, I'm going to press Ctrl B, and I'm just going to drag a box around the end of the passage and just kind of zoom in there. That's looking very cool in sci-fi. So I just want to view this area because that's where we're going to be adding the other lights. So I'm first going to select this little piece right here, and this piece is the piece which is connecting the other 2 pieces. So I just want to click on this piece, and I actually want to click on the drop down, and I want to make it the dark metal instead of the light metal. All right, and then I can also click on the back piece here, and I can press press tab to go into edit mode, and I'm actually going to press the A key to select everything, and I'll press the period on the numpad to zoom into it. So now I just want to select the different pieces and assign the materials. So I can press the L key and the L key and just continue to press the L key to select all of these pieces here, because these are the pieces that I want to have the dark metal, and also press the L key to select that piece. Alright, so now that we have all those pieces selected, I can click on the plus right here to add a new material in the slot. Let's click on this drop down, and then I just want to click on the dark metal. And then I can click on the assign button, so now if I tab back into object mode, those pieces have the dark metal. So let's do the same thing for the pipes. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, press A to deselect. I can just press the L key with my mouse hovered over the pipes to select all the pipes. So I'm going to click on the plus right here again to add a new material. I can click on the drop down and I want to select the pipes. So now the pipes are within the material slots, and then I can click on the assign button. Alright, so now I just want to do that for the blue lights and the white lights. So just hover your mouse over all the lights and press the L key. That is going to select the linked vertices, and I just want to select all of these lights here. So just press the L key with your mouse hovered over those pieces. Didn't want to select the back piece. I just want to select those lights there. All right, those are all the pieces. So I can now click on the plus right here, and then I can click on the drop down, and I want to select the blue light. So now the blue light is within the material slots, and then I can click on the assign button, and that way all the selection is going to have the blue lights. And then again, just like we did before with the other control panel, I want some of these lights to have the white light just to give a little bit of variation. So I'm going to press the A key to deselect, and then I can just hover my mouse over these objects and press L, and I just want to select a few of them, not very many, but just a few of them here and there. So just maybe that many. Oh, I want to select that one as well. So I can now do the same thing. So click on the plus right here to add a new material in the slot. I want to click right here, and we are going to add the white light to this one, and then just make sure that's still selected, and you can click on the assign button. All right, so I can tab to go back to object mode, and I can press the 0 on the numpad and go into the camera view, and I can hold down the Z button and move my mouse into the rendered view, and we can see how that's looking. So that is looking very cool. So we now have some white lights and some blue lights way back there. So now if you wanted to, you could also duplicate some of the lights. I think I do just want to add a few more lights just because there aren't very many. So I'm going to hold down the Z button, go back into the solid view. I'm actually going to hold down the Z button and go down to the material preview, and then just select this object, and I can press the tab key to go into edit mode. And then I'm just going to press the A key to select everything, and I can press the period on the numpad just to zoom over here. And actually, let's go right back over here to the layout so it's a bit easier to see, and press the period on the numpad to zoom over to the selection. And I'm just going to navigate right in here so I can see the inside of the tunnel. All right, so I want to use the snapping feature again. So I can click on this button right here to turn on the snapping feature. We used the snapping feature in the other parts of the tutorial series to kind of move the lights around. So I'm now going to press the L key with my mouse hovered over this light, and I can press Shift D to duplicate it. Let's stick it there, and because we have the snapping feature turned on, it's going to snap to the face there. Then I can press Shift D to duplicate, bring that one over there, and also maybe press the L key to select this light. I can duplicate this and maybe put one up there. But I don't want to add too many lights, because if I add too many lights, it just is too bright. But just a few lights here and there, so that is pretty good. I'm going to press the 0 on the numpad to go back into the camera view, and then I want to preview the entire thing. So I'm going to press Control B, and I'm going to drag a box around the camera and then let go. And then I can hold down the Z button, and I'm going to move my mouse up into the rendered view. And there we go. So we now have a really cool Sci-Fi Passage. So we are almost ready to render this. Let's press Control S to save the Blender file. There is one more thing though that I want to add before I render this, and that is that I want to add a depth of field. So I just want to add a subtle depth of field. So some things that are really close up will be just a little bit blurred. So I'm going to hold down the Z button, go back into solid view, and I want to add an object that the camera can focus on. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go right here to empty, and I actually just want to add like a sphere empty. Now, why I'm using an empty objects for the camera's focus is because the empty objects aren't actually visible in the render. So now I just want to move the empty object over to wherever I want the camera to be focusing on. So we already have the snapping feature still turned on. You can see the snapping feature is still turned on. So if I press G to grab, you can see that we are now snapping this to the walls of the passage. So I am just going to bring this empty over, stick it there, and also scale it down. And I'm just going to stick it right about there. So kind of halfway in the Sci-Fi Passage, kind of about halfway. So that's where the focus is going to be. So I can now click on this button to turn the snapping feature off. So now to add the depth of field, I can just click right here to select the camera, and then I can go right down here to the camera settings, and I'm just going to click on the depth of field. And then right over here on the focus object, I can click on the eyedropper, and I'm going to select the empty object. So I can now hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view just to preview how that's looking. So I can now change this f-stop value, and that is going to change the focus. So if I turn it way down to like a 0.1, you can see everything is super focused. I want to turn the f-stop value to like a 1.2. I think a 1.2 looks pretty good. So now if you look kind of right over here in the corners, you can see it is a little bit blurred, but then most of the passage is focused. So that is pretty good. So I'm going to click right over here on the render properties to do some render settings. Now this is a pretty dark scene, and I am using the Cycles render engine, so I do want to add a lot of samples to this scene to get rid of a lot of the noise. So right here on the sampling, right down here on the render samples, I am going to turn the samples up really high to 1000. Now this might take your computer a long time to render, so you definitely don't have to use 1000 samples. I want to use 1000 samples though, because I don't want the scene to be very noisy. But one thing we will do in the compositor is add a denoise node to kind of smooth out the image. But I find that 1000 samples does make it look really nice. But you could just add maybe 200 or 300 or 500 samples. Now to make it render faster, I can also click on the light paths. And if we turn the light paths down, then it's going to render faster. So I'm going to first open up the max bounces, and I'm going to leave the total and the diffuse and glossy to 4 because I do want to use some of the light paths so that it looks realistic, but all of the other light paths I can turn to 0, and that way Blender won't have to calculate as many of the light paths, and so the scene will render a bit faster. So I can turn the transmission to 0, I can turn the transparent to 0, we aren't using any transparency. The indirect light, I can turn that to 0, I can turn the filter gloss to 0, and then also these caustics here, I can turn off the reflective and refractive caustics. We're not using any caustics in this scene, so I can turn those all off. So that will help to make it render faster. Of course, one of the main things though is the sample count. So if it is taking too long to render, you could turn the samples down. Or you could also use Blender Eevee. Blender Eevee does render faster. Now there is one more thing that I want to do. I want to go right over here to the output properties, and I want to change the resolution. So I am using a resolution of 2560 by 1440, but you could totally just use the default resolution of 1920 by 1080, so 1080p. That is very standard. I want a very nice high quality image, so I'm actually going to turn the resolution percentage to like 200. So this is going to be a very large high quality image, but of course this will take much longer to render, so you could just leave this at the default settings with 1920 by 1080, and if the resolution is smaller, the image size will be smaller, so it will render faster. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to make it a really big image though, because I want to have a really nice render. Alright, so before you render the scene, make sure you press Ctrl S to save the Blender file just in case it crashes. And then I'm going to let this render, and I'll come back when it finishes. So I'm just going to click on render, and then I can just click on the render image, or you can press the shortcut key, which is F12. And the render finished, and so my computer rendered this image in about 18 minutes. So I just worked on some other stuff and then came back to this when it was finished. And because this is a dark image, if you zoom in here, you can see there still is a little bit of grain, but I'll be using the denoise node in the compositor to smooth that out. And we're also going to be doing some other things like adding some glares to kind of brighten up the lights and some other things to just really make this image look nice. So let's do the compositing now. So I'm going to click right over here on the compositing compositing tab, and then I can just make this smaller because I don't need the timeline. So make sure the backdrop button is turned on, and then I'm also going to click on use nodes, and it's going to add the render layers and the composite. So earlier in the tutorial series, I did turn on the Node Wrangler add-on, so I can press Control Shift, and then I can select the render layers, and that is going to add a viewer node. And make sure you have the backdrop turned on, and we can see that in the background. And then you can press V to zoom the background out and Alt V to zoom the background in. So I want to add all of my compositing nodes to the viewer and the composite. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and then I'm going to right click and drag, and then drag a line over those wires and let go. And this is going to add a reroute, so the reroute can connect both the viewer and the composite. So now we just have one wire here that we can plug nodes up to. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to start by adding the denoise node. So I'm just going to drop the denoise node right here. We'll just wait for that to load up. And I actually just want to change it to the fast so that it'll denoise faster. And we'll just kind of zoom in here. You can kind of look at the background, and there we go. So you can see it really smooths out the image and makes it all look much nicer. Now I also want to add kind of a cool effect to make the edges look a bit more sharp. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the filter node, and we're going to stick the filter node after the denoise. Now instead of it being set to soften, I want to click on this, and I want to instead change this to the Sobel. And once that finishes, you can see what that's looking like. So it's making the edges kind of sharp and bright, and that's looking very cool. Now I don't want this effect to be super strong, so I want to turn the factor down to just like a 0.3, and that way it'll be less strong. So I'll just wait for that to finish. And the denoise node is taking up a lot of time for it to composite, so I'm going to click on the denoise node and press the M key, and that is going to mute the node. So now we'll be able to preview the other compositing faster, and then at the end we can just turn the denoise back on. So if I click on this node, the filter, and press the M key, you can see what it's doing. So it's basically kind of giving the image a little bit of a pop, and it's kind of popping out those edges there. If I turn it up more, you can kind of see what it's doing, but I just want it to be subtle, so I'm just going to turn it to like a 0.3. Now this entire passageway is actually kind of dark, and I want to make it brighter. So let's do some color correction. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the RGB curves, and I'm just going to drop the RGB curves right here. So then I want to make this brighter. So on the C right here, I'm just going to click and drag a dot, and I'm going to bring the dot up here, and that's going to make everything brighter, and that looks really cool. And then I also want to give it a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to click and drag another dot, and I'm going to bring this dot down a little bit. So now you can see what that's doing. If I press the M key, I can toggle between muting the node and unmuting the node, and it just brightens everything up, and you're able to see the image a lot better. Now I also want to add a glare node to brighten up those lights. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a glare node, and the glare node is going to add a glow effect around those lights. So I'm going to drop the glare node right here after the RGB curves. Now I don't want to use the streaks, I want to click on the streaks, and I instead want to use the fog glow. And then right here on the quality, I also want to change this to high. Now it is kind of subtle, you can't see it very well, but let's turn the size up to 9 so you can see it a little bit better. And then I also want to duplicate this and just make another one. So I'm going to press Shift to duplicate, and I'm going to stick this right there, and that is going to make another glare. Alright, so now that we've added 2 glares, it is quite a bit brighter. Now actually, I think I want to click on the high, and I want to change this to like medium on both of these. And if the quality is medium, it will composite a bit faster. And what I also like about changing it to medium is that the glow is actually a bit larger. Alright, so the next thing that I want to add is a vignette, and a vignette is going to make the edges a bit darker, and so you'll be able to focus more on the center of the scene. So to make the vignette, I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the box mask, and let's just stick the box mask right down here. Now if you click on the box mask, you can see there's a little box there, and so if I make this bigger, I can change the width and the height of the box. And I want to make the width and height pretty big, but I do want to leave kind of a little bit of a gap in between the sides and the front. So now I can blur this box mask. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the blur node, and we are going to drop the blur node right here in front of the box mask. And then I can plug the mask up to the image on the blur. Now to preview this, I can Control Shift and select the blur, and that is going to preview it. So there is our box mask, but it's not blurred at all. You can just see it's black and then white, but I want to blur the edges so that we can use it as a vignette. So I'm going to click on the X value, and then I can drag down and then let go, and that's going to change both of the values at the same time. So I'm going to be using a blur value of 500. Now you might want to change this depending on your image size, because if your image is smaller, then you may not need to blur it this much. So you can just change it to something that looks good. I'm going to blur it by 500. You could make it less though, maybe just like 200 or something. And you can of course change the blur amount later once we've actually set up the vignette. So I now want to add the blur node into the final compositing. So the first thing I'm going to do is Control Shift and select this reroute here to preview that. And then I can press B for the box select. Just box select these nodes and bring them over. So I now want to add an alpha over node right in here so that we can mix the image with the blur. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the alpha over node, and I'm going to drop the alpha over node right here. So this glare can go into the bottom image, and then I want to take the blur image and I want to put that into the factor. And there we go, it is compositing. So you can see it is now taking that box mask, the blurred box mask, and it is putting it around the image. But I don't want to have a white vignette because that looks very weird. I want to click on this image here, this top image, and I'm going to make this fully black. So now the vignette is going to be black instead of white. And there we go, so it's compositing, and so you can see that it's basically just adding a little dark area around the sides, and so now your focus is going to be drawn more into the center. And I do think I want to make the box mask a little bit bigger, so click on the box mask, and on the width and height, I'm just going to bring it out a little bit, so that way the vignette is going to be a little bit more subtle. So something like that is pretty good. Now I also want to give this image a lens distortion, just to kind of give it a cool sci-fi effect. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the lens distortion node, and I'm going to stick that after the alpha over. So I do want to make this very subtle, so if I open this up, make it a little bit bigger, on this dispersion value, I'm just going to turn this to like a 0.02. So just a 0.02, so it will be very subtle, but it's going to give it a small lens distortion effect. And now you can see on the edges there, if you look kind of on the edges, it is giving a little bit of a lens distortion. If I like navigate right over here, kind of look at the background on the side, you can especially see it right there. So there's a little bit of a lens distortion, also a little bit of a lens distortion right there. So it kind of gives it a cool sci-fi effect. And you can see it's also like pulling out the edges. So that looks very cool. All right, now there's just one more thing I want to do to this image, and that is that I want to create like a sunbeam effect to make the lights glowing a bit more and kind of have some streaks of the lights shining through the passage. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A, I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for the sunbeams node, and I'm just going to drop the sunbeams node right here over the alpha over. So I can now take this image and I want to put it into the image on the sunbeams, and then I want to preview the sunbeams, so I can just Control Shift and select the sunbeams. Now the sunbeams node isn't going to do anything on default, so we need to take the ray length, and I'm going to turn that all the way to 1. This way the rays of the sunbeams are going to be all the way up to 1, and so they're going to be shining out from this center point. Now I can actually click on this center point and I can drag it around, and you can see that it's going to drag around the X value and the Y value. And then I'll just wait for this to load up so you can see what it's doing. So it's basically taking those lighter areas and it's kind of blurring it and kind of smudging it and making those cool sunbeam effects. So if I Control Shift and select right back over here on the reroute, and I want to stick the sunbeams right here on the very back where those lights are. So I'm actually going to just click and drag, and I'm going to drop this right here. So I'm going to stick it right about there, kind of in the center where the end of the passage is. So right about there. And you could also just change it with the X and Y values right here on the sunbeams, or you can just drag the X. So I now want to take the sunbeams and I want to mix it in with the original image. So to do this, I'm going to be using an alpha over node. So I can press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to stick the alpha over node right here after the lens distortion. So I can now take the image from the sunbeams and I'm going to put that into the bottom one, and then this lens distortion can go into the top one. And so it's going to mix the sunbeams into the original image. And again, I'll just wait for this to load up to show you what it's doing. So there we go. You can see we're now able to see the original image and the sunbeams, but that is way too bright. The sunbeams are very, very strong, and I want to make them more subtle. So I can change the factor value on the alpha over. So I'm going to turn the factor value really small to like a 0.04. So this way, by changing it to a 0.04, it's mostly just going to use the original image, but it'll just add a tiny little bit of the sunbeams. So again, I'll just wait for this to load up, and now you can see there's some little sunbeams. It is subtle. If you kind of look up there, kind of zoom in there, you can see there's some little sunbeams shining through there. So now I just want to turn back on the denoise because the image is a little bit noisy. So I can just select the denoise right here at the starting, and I can press the M key, and that is going to unmute the node. And then there is just one more thing that I want to do. I want to really pop out the blue color and make it more blue. So I'm going to go right over here and click on the RGB curves. So I can click right over here on this B, and this is for blue. And then what I can do, if I just kind of bring these down, get these out of the way so I can see the background, is I can click and drag right here, and this is going to pull out a little dot, and I'm going to bring this up towards this corner, and this is going to pop out the blue colors, and it's going to make all of the blue colors more contrasty and a bit brighter. And there we go, so you can see what that's looking like. Now it is looking almost like a little bit purplish, so you can also click on the G here for green, and I'm going to click and drag a dot, kind of bring it over here to the corner, and by bringing out the green values a little bit, it's going to make the blue look a bit of a lighter color. And there we go. So the final image is loading up, and now we have this very cool bright blue sci-fi passage. So this is the final image. So we can now just save this image. So we've already rendered the image. We don't need to re-render it. To save this image, you can press the F11 key, or you can also just click right here on render, and you can click on view render, or the F11 key. Now right now we are previewing the render result. So this is what it looks like when it was rendered. But I want to click right here on the drop down, and I want to click on the viewer node, and there is the finished final composited image. So that is looking very cool. So then to save this image, you can just click on image, and I'll click on save as. So I will save this as final render in the folder with my files, and right over here on the file format, I'm just going to save this as a JPEG image, so the file size is a little bit smaller, but then I will turn the quality to 100. And then I can click on save as image. All right, I'm just going to press Ctrl S again to save the Blender file, and this is it for the Sci-Fi Passage Blender tutorial series. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you were easily able to follow along, and thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this tutorial series and you'd like to help support me and this channel, then you can check out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. Those are two great ways to help support the channel. And if you'd like to help support me here on YouTube, you can also check out the YouTube memberships by clicking on the join button down there next to the subscribe button. And the YouTube memberships is a really great way to help support the channel monthly, as well as getting some cool perks on YouTube. And if you enjoyed this tutorial and you'd like to give me a little tip, you can also send a super thanks underneath this video here on YouTube. And I really do appreciate all of your support. But again, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial series, and thank you for watching.